Hi, my name is Janelis Benitez, and this is my presentation on teen heartbreak. In high school, many people are getting into their first long term relationships. The heart is ready to open up and experience what it is like to give and receive love, and it's an important chapter in a person's life. Many adults can recall having their first loves when they were younger, and they turn out to be the most fond of memories. 35% of America's teens have been in a romantic relationship, but that's just one statistic. Other sources have even higher numbers, up to almost half the population of teenagers in America. Because they're young, teens will have their most vulnerable moments in these relationships. It's easier to love when you're young and express your emotions. Relationships like these are built on a lot of trust and desire, and people's true colors show the deeper in love they are. The brain is still developing at this point, so teens are also most likely to act on impulses and take risks. They aren't afraid to chase after their feelings and pursue something that makes them happy. It's all a learning experience that continues to make their brains stronger. But these impulses can also lead to bad decision making and emotional roller coasters in relationships. Young love is what some would say is the purest form of love because it involves earnest mistakes and acts of pure emotion rather than logic. It's easier to become wrapped up in a relationship and slowly become dependent on it. The brain takes these feelings and experiences and it can drastically affect the way someone thinks and feels, especially after a breakup where a person is most vulnerable. This leads into my big question. How do certain coping mechanisms after breakups affect teens' mental health? But before we begin discussing that, we must define what a coping mechanism is. By definition, a coping mechanism is the thoughts and behaviors mobilized to manage internal and external stressful situations. Some examples can include taking deep breaths when faced with anxiety. Others could be watching a favorite movie after having a troubling day. These kinds of actions are ways the body and mind are able to handle negative emotions and slowly diminish them. There are all kinds of coping mechanisms, and different people cope in different ways. It depends on what works for you and your situation. But there are two categories for coping mechanisms: positive and negative. Some examples of negative coping mechanisms after breakups are drug abuse, overeating, overworking, and bottling emotions. Drug abuse is a common coping mechanism in teens because it helps when numbing the pain, even if it's temporary, and teens are more likely to be swayed into using drugs than any other age group. Overeating can lead to having serious health problems, and it stems from needing something to distract oneself from thinking about the breakup. That distraction becomes a consistent escape route, and it's overall just not healthy both mentally and physically. Overworking can mean many different things. You can work out your body beyond its limits, drown in schoolwork, or just overload yourself with too many tasks all at once. This is also a type of distraction, and it puts a lot of strain on the mind. A young brain cannot handle being overloaded, especially if it's not used to it already. Lastly, bottling up emotions is a common coping mechanism since it's easiest for teens not to talk about their problems. However, this can cause mental breakdowns or an increase in aggression. Eventually, you'll begin to feel the pain one way or another, but bottling it up will only make it hurt more in the end. These are only a few types of coping mechanisms that are negative, but again, there are much more. It just depends on the situation and the person. The negative coping mechanisms also have to do with the fact that teens are at higher risk for depression after breakups. This includes acts of self-harm, self-silencing, and suicidal thoughts. As I mentioned before, teens are most vulnerable in romantic relationships, and they become deeply rooted with their partner. To sever that bond can be extremely traumatic for some people. Teens can also start to develop a negative image of themselves. Their self-esteem can start to suffer as maybe they feel they weren't good enough to somehow maintain the relationship. They can also feel undeserving of any kind of love and just see themselves as a bad person. Like maybe they did something wrong or hurt their partner, and that's why the relationship didn't last. Although these effects of breakups can be lessened, Although these effects of breakups can be lessened if one practices positive coping mechanisms, some of them include no contact, meditation, talk therapy, and journaling. No contact is when you cut complete contact with your ex partner and practice social distancing from them. This is a great way to get your mind off of the relationship and start to heal. Some may say that's ignoring your problems, but it actually helps fight the urge to become dependent on that person again. No contact can help you learn to become independent and rely on self love. It's sort of like an out of sight, out of mind kind of feeling. Meditation helps with clearing the mind of negative thoughts. It's peaceful and helps you become in touch with your mind and body. Talk therapy can mean multiple things. It could be going to a therapist, talking to your parents, siblings, or friends. It can also be connecting to groups who have gone through similar traumas. Regardless, this means talking out your feelings and understanding them. Journaling is similar, but instead of talking, you're writing your feelings. This is easier for some people because maybe they're better at channeling their feelings through words, stories, and poetry. I did a survey on teen breakups, and the first question I asked was, have you ever been in a long term relationship? Half said yes, and half said no. The next question was, how did you feel after the breakup? I gave a list of emotions, some positive and some negative. The most picked answer was free, while most of the other answers were negative emotions like miserable, regretful, and lonely. The next question I asked was, how did you cope with the breakup? These are some quotes I took from the answers I received. One said, learn to enjoy things on my own again. This quote is a good representation of positive coping mechanisms as they practice becoming self-reliant. The next quote said, focusing on the next thing I needed to do. Sometimes they didn't cope well. This person was honest with themselves. While they did move on with their life and tried to indulge in other tasks, they realized that sometimes they didn't cope in a healthy way, but that's okay. The fact that they realized it was a first step in becoming more positive and being able to heal. Lastly, pretend like nothing happened, just go on with life. This may have worked for this person, but typically this is not a very good way to deal with the breakup, especially if it took a bad toll on your emotions. This is a graph from the next question I asked. Do you consider your coping mechanisms to be healthy outlets? Most people said most times, and the other answers were pretty split. I find it interesting that only one person was certain that their coping mechanism was healthy, while everyone else was not 100% sure. My last question was, what are some healthy coping mechanisms you want to try? Someone said journaling and physical activity as everyone says it works. It's true that many people say this works. I have personally tried journaling, and I think that is a great way to get stuff off your chest because there's no one to judge you and your writing is yours alone. It's more personal. The next person said going out, meeting others, staying to yourself till you're healed. And lastly, someone said writing it down. So, to answer my big question, there are many different ways of coping with a breakup. Some good coping mechanisms, like talking about your feelings or just indulging in hobbies, could help improve your mental health because dealing with heartbreak is not easy. Similarly, bad coping mechanisms like bottling up emotions only hurt your mental health and can cause serious stress and even long